We've been recently contacted by a source that has insider information with what Apple is doing with their higher-end Apple Silicon Macs, including both the high-end iMac and the Mac Pro. And based on what this source has told us, we can finally put a ton of puzzle pieces together, including some recent leaks and reports from reputable sources like Mark Gurman, to nail down both the release date and various specs and features of the high-end iMac. So let's get right into it. The main piece of info our source gave us is that there will not be an iMac Pro or a very expensive iMac. The source said that Apple is constraining how far they take the iMac based on a $2,000 retail consumer price target, which is similar to the current 27-inch iMac's price. The reason for that is that Apple wants to be more consumer focused for their Apple Silicon Macs, lowering the prices compared to how expensive the old Intel models could be configured. The main reason is that when it comes to the Mac, most people buy the lower end Macs since they're much easier to afford. A smaller percentage would go for the 16-inch MacBook Pro and 27-inch iMac, and an even smaller percentage would go for the Intel-based iMac Pro. And then an even smaller percentage of people would spec them out with the highest end Intel chips. So the source is basically saying that the now discontinued iMac Pro is dead with no more refresh expected to come. And if you think about it, the M1 Macs have basically proven to Apple and the world that going for lower entry-level prices with Apple Silicon was enough to cause Mac sales to absolutely skyrocket and break records in terms of sales, even though all of those new Macs share just a single M1 chip. So because of that successful strategy, the Mac lineup, including the high-end iMac, will now be more consumer focused. And the source says that the new smaller Apple Silicon Mac Pro will basically be there as the high-end customizable option for the heavy professionals out there. And interestingly, the source claims that even the Mac Pro will see a huge price decrease, starting somewhere at around $3,000+ at the base price, which is half the price of the current Intel Mac Pro, and it's all due to Apple saving tons of cash by using their own Apple-designed chips instead of paying Intel for CPUs and AMD for discrete GPUs. That right there is also another reason why the iMac Pro isn't coming back. There just isn't enough of a gap between the $2,000 iMac and the $3,000 Mac Pro to warrant an iMac Pro to fit in between those price points. Now moving on, I fully believe that the high-end iMac will for sure have a chin, just like the 24-inch iMac, for a few different reasons. First off, the larger iMac has always looked exactly like the lower end models in the past. So it makes total sense for the upcoming larger iMac to match the 24-inch iMac in terms of the design, which will allow Apple to use these side-by-side marketing images of both iMac sizes. Now don't worry, the chin doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to look bad, because even if the chin is the same height as on the 24-inch iMac, the larger display size on the high-end version will actually make it look much slimmer on the larger iMac display, as you can see in this image that I drew up in Photoshop. And on top of that, I can also guarantee that Apple will be able to fit the entire logic board into the chin area, just like they're already doing with the 24-inch iMac, because increasing the display size will allow them to increase the thickness of the Mac itself by around 25% to help fit a thicker logic board, all while keeping the relative dimensions looking proper and balanced compared to the 24-inch model. And if you think about it, a larger display would mean that the chin itself would become significantly longer, giving Apple even more room for a longer logic board. So based on all of that, it honestly really just makes sense to keep the chin around on the high-end iMac to keep the design language the same between both sizes, since Apple has always done that in the past. And for that same reason, I can basically guarantee that the larger iMac will have white bezels just like the current 24-inch model. The main reason is that many buyers of the 24-inch iMac have been pleasantly surprised by how well the white bezels blend into light or white colored walls, actually being much less distracting than the current black bezels. And then if you add in the fact that the bezels will look even slimmer and less noticeable on the high-end iMac because of the larger display, it makes total sense for the bezels to be white. And now before I get into the interesting details about the Apple Silicon chip specs and release date, I want to get into the actual display size of the iMac itself. I can 100% guarantee that the iMac will not have a 32-inch display because that would make the iMac larger than the 32-inch Pro Display XDR, which makes no sense at all. On top of that, our source says that the cost of taking the iMac to a 30-inch or larger display would push the price beyond Apple's $2,000 retail price target for the iMac, so it needs to stay under 30 inches. My source also believes that Apple is working on a cheaper external display which will not use mini LED technology like the Pro Display XDR, with a price target of around $1,200. And if you didn't already know this, Apple's 27-inch iMac uses the same exact panel as LG's ultrafine 5K display that Apple sells on their website. So I expect the new display panel that Apple is working on to be identical to the one that's going into the higher-end iMac. And because of all this, I'd have to place my bets that the new high-end iMac will have either a 28-inch display or a 29.5-inch display, which Apple would market as a 30-inch. Now moving on to the chip situation, I'm now 100% sure that the high-end iMac will be getting the M1X chip as the only chip option for a few different reasons. First off, the Twitter user DylanDKT has recently confirmed that the high-end iMac will be released next year. And in Mark Gurman's recent edition of his newsletter, he basically agreed to the exact same thing. This totally makes sense because if you think about it, Apple revealed the M1 iMac 5 months after revealing the M1 MacBooks, and it ended up getting the exact same chip. So Apple could end up doing the same exact thing for the high-end iMac, giving it the same M1X chip that we're expecting for the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros. The second reason is that Dylan believes that the M1X chip will be going into the higher-end Mac Mini, the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, and the higher-end iMac, which I totally agree with. Now, Mark Gurman says that there's a chance that it'll be getting the M2X chip instead, but I don't think so because Apple would be skipping a generation, which is wasted potential because giving this iMac the M1X will provide a much easier upgrade path for the next iMac refresh, while at the same time keeping the entire current Mac lineup in line with the same M1 based IP. Now on top of that, Dylan also confirmed that upcoming Apple Silicon Macs will not feature any kind of discrete GPU on Mac other than the Mac Pro. So this points to the iMac getting the M1X chip as the only chip option. But of course, Apple will likely utilize chip binning to lower the base price and give users some upgrade options, similar to what they did with the 24-inch iMac. Except this time around, I expect Apple to offer either a 12-core, 16-core, or 32-core GPU. Now finally getting to the release date, Dylan explained that the iMac has been delayed until next year, with the main reason being that Apple doesn't want their devices to compete for attention, and delays in product releases have led to this timetable. What he means is that we were initially expecting the 14 and 16-inch M1X MacBook Pros to come at WWDC in June, and in that case, the iMac would have been released in the fall. But since the MacBooks got pushed back, Apple is also pushing back the iMac just to spread out the timetable of releases. Because if Apple released the M1X MacBook Pros, Mac Mini, and iMac all at the same time, the iMac would be buried underneath the hype of the MacBook Pros because they're obviously much more popular due to being portable laptops. So Apple is simply going to delay the iMac for a few months, even if they have to sit on a shelf somewhere, just so that the iMac can shine in its own spotlight. And this is even more evidence that it's packing an M1X chip instead of a future M2X. Now to give you even more evidence, Mark Gurman's Power On newsletter shows that Apple will just barely hit their 2-year Apple Silicon transition target, with the 2022 Apple Silicon Mac Pro getting released at the end of next year in November. So because of that, Apple likely doesn't want to release the larger iMac at the same time as the Mac Pro. since they'll be competing for attention. So in reality, it kind of has to get released in the first half of next year. And if we go even further, both Mark Gurman and Dylan agree that a redesigned MacBook Air is coming next year, with Dylan claiming that it's gonna come in the first half of 2022 with a brand new M2 chip, which I totally agree with. And I fully believe that this new M2 chip deserves its own Apple event, and that's why I'm personally predicting that the MacBook Air will be revealed in March. And because of that, I think it makes total sense for the M1X high-end iMac to be released before that event happens, potentially through a simple press release, since Apple has already showed off the new redesign with the 24-inch iMac. And now finally, let's finish off with the pricing. Our source believes that the base model will remain at or under $2,000, which makes total sense. And in my opinion, the price of the iMac fully depends on the price of the upcoming 14-inch MacBook Pro. If the 14-inch sticks to the same $1,799 price tag, then the iMac will match it. But if the 14-inch goes up to $1,999, then the iMac will also be priced at $1,999 guaranteed, but no more than $2,000 for the base price for sure. So with all that said, here's my full prediction list for the features and specs, which is definitely subject to change as more and more leaks and rumors get released, but for now, I'm pretty confident in all of these details. Now, if you totally disagree with me, then let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but if you enjoyed this video, go ahead and click the circle above to subscribe for more videos like this one. Definitely check out one of those two right over there. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.